Any of the CCs, if you see it once it's live, please let me know and I will get going.
It's going.
Yep, it's
Presentation's
indeed
up.
live now.
You can see the first slide. You can see the first slide. All right. You can see the first. There's going to be a slight echo there for just half a second. I was checking the stream myself. So, welcome to the TAW U class on public speaking. Today we are going to be going over public speaking, what it is. We're going to talk about how you can improve your skills as a public speaker and what you should be avoiding when trying to speak in front of a group. This slideshow is going to probably take about 40 minutes. We will have some Q&As during it, and we will have a extensive Q&A at the end if anybody has questions. We'll work through this, and there'll be plenty of chances for that. Until then, like I said, keep your mics muted. I'll call on you to unmute and ask me questions as we go through. All right, just as an introduction, my name is Muzzle. I'm the EDU PIA, which is Public Information Administrator. I mostly work on public messages and social media such. I'm a public speaker in my real life in many different ways. I've taken college classes on it. In general, this is something I enjoy doing. If anybody has questions, concerns, wants to know more, and we don't get to it today, you can use my email at muzzle@taw.net. I'll respond to pretty much anything that I get from a taw.net email. So use your taw.net email unless I know you already. All right. Just as I went over already, for the most part, ground rules for today. We're going to have Q&A periods. Please don't make noise in the channel until those times come. If you want to ask a question, put an X in chat. If you aren't able to speak today because you have a microphone issue or something, you can type out your question and I will still answer it. So you can still do that. All right, we're going to jump right into it. And some of you may be expecting me to start with what public speaking is, but I'm actually going to start with what public speaking is not, because it gets confusing a little bit. The words public speaking make a lot of people think anytime you're in public and you're talking, but it's more of a skill when we're talking about public speaking, and it's referring to a specific situation. So public speaking is not if you're talking with your friends at a restaurant or at a dance or something like that, or at a club or whatever. That's just a situation where you are in public and you're talking. It's not the skill public speaking. Public speaking is also not one-on-one discussions like an interview or some other place where you and the person that you're speaking to are directly communicating between only you and that person. And then obviously, if it's unplanned or impromptu, that doesn't qualify as public speaking in the way that we're going to talk about it today. Some people will say it's still public speaking. They're not wrong, but that's not the type of situation we're going to be covering today. Now, if we're going to say what is public speaking is a process of delivering a message. That's the most basic form. But specifically, it's when you're talking to a group. It can be big or small, 10 people or 100 people or even more. But it also needs to be planned. The person giving the speech or the lecture or the talk needs to have a goal in mind. If they don't have a goal in mind, it's just an impromptu speech. It's just something they're making up on the fly, which happens in real life for different situations, but it's not the public speaking skills we're going to be talking about today. So, if you or somebody you know is going to be public speaking, there are things to focus on. Where do you start? The beginning point of any process to plan out a speech or prepare for a speech is you need to know what your purpose is. Your purpose is going to be something like this: trying to inform people about an issue, trying to persuade them to agree with you, trying to criticize something, or trying to encourage somebody. To inform, to persuade, criticize, encourage, these are purposes. And if you know what your purpose is, it allows you to create your message and plan your speech in a way that actually makes sense and effectively communicates what you're trying to say. Why does it matter to know what your purpose is? Basically, if you don't know what your purpose is, you're not going to be able to create an effective speech or an effective presentation. The reason for that is that both your speech's content, the words you're going to say, and also the delivery method of your speech are going to change based on what your goal is. We're going to see an example of that on the next slide. So here's an example. We're going to consider two different speeches with two different purposes. The first speech is trying to persuade. Somebody, say at a town hall meeting, is arguing in favor of a law to ban loud noise at night in their neighborhood. The contents of that speech are specific, and they're going to talk about the past noise near their house and how it has affected them. The delivery of the speech will also be different than other types of speeches because it's a personal issue. The person has a personal reason to care about it. The person is also going to want to use simple explanations. This isn't a situation where lawyers need to use big words to describe complicated issues. It's a simple idea. People don't want noise near their house, and so they want a law preventing it. Now, as a second example, consider a speech to inform. A speech where a scientist is presenting a recently discovered animal species to fellow scientists is going to be very different than our first example. In this second example, the scientist is going to use details and data along with facts and other scientific knowledge in his speech. It's going to be much more technical, using complicated words that scientists will understand, but that we probably wouldn't. And it's going to be scholarly. He's going to speak in a very proper manner. It's not going to be simple phrases. The sentences are going to be long. The ideas are going to be more complex. This is the difference between two of the four different purposes I showed you in the last slide. And every time you have a different purpose, everything about your speech may be different. Even with the same purpose, you still can have differences between speeches, what the delivery should be like, what the contents are going to be like. You have to know your purpose, but then there is more that you need to focus on after you know your purpose, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So, if you know what your purpose is, you need to get the basics of public speaking skills. The basic skills are what the foundation of all speeches are built on. They're not specific towards your purpose. Once you have the basic skills, you build your speech based on what your needs are of the purpose that you're trying to accomplish. So, what skills do you need? You need preparation of ideas. This can be learning your material if you're trying to give a scientific explanation of something. This can be deciding what your beliefs are if you're trying to have a debate. This can be research. This can just be memorization if your speech is for fun or to entertain. You also need good voice and tone. We're going to explain what these mean in a minute, but without a good voice and a good tone, nobody will want to listen to you, and people will get bored or angry at you. You also need to have a controlled talking speed. You don't want to speak too fast, you don't want to speak too slow. Lastly, you need to understand your audience. If you are saying a message that your audience is not willing to listen to, you're not achieving your goal. It doesn't matter how good your speech might be on paper. So we're going to go through each of these and give some examples and give some better explanation. The first one is preparation of ideas. This is probably the biggest skill that needs to be learned by anybody trying to do public speaking for the first time or just get better at it. You need to decide what you want to say and in which order you need to say it. That's the most basic way of preparing your ideas. I just had a drink. So you might want to research the topic if that's necessary, like if it's a scientific discussion. You may also, or probably should, practice and rehearse your speech. Memorization isn't always necessary, and we're going to come back to that in a bit. But people always think that public speaking relies on memorizing your speech, and oftentimes it's not necessary. What is usually helpful and is more likely is that you prepare a note card or a script. Once again, a script or a note card isn't always necessary, but it's usually a good tool. The next skill that you need, as I said, was a good voice. We're splitting up voice and tone so that I can focus on each a little bit more in depth. A good voice means that you're speaking clearly. You're not muddling your words, you're not muttering. You need to be loud enough so that you can be heard. For this speech or for this lecture, I'm speaking into a microphone, so I don't need to speak loudly. If I'm in a lecture hall, I may need to project my voice more to reach the back rows. If I'm in a small room with several board members of a company, I may not need to speak as loudly because there's only 6 people in the room and they're closer to me. But at the same time as being loud enough to be heard, you also don't want to shout or be overly loud. If you're too loud, people are going to stop listening to you because it's just too much noise. So you have to find the balance between being loud enough to be heard and not being too loud. Lastly, and this is something that a lot of people forget, but is also something everybody has experienced, you need to try and avoid saying the word like or the words or wah repeatedly. And I'm sure many of you have seen or heard people in your lives who use the word like as a filler, where if they lose their train of thought, they will say like repeatedly to just fill the time until they can get to their next thought. Some people stutter to do this. Some people say or and struggle to get to their next sentence. It's a skill to have your sentences flow from one to another without undue pauses. But even if you have to pause, it's better to just take a moment of silence, not 10 to 15 seconds, but 2 or 3 seconds of silence just to inhale and then exhale is not going to make you look like you've lost your train of thought. And it's better than saying like, and then continuing, because once you've done that, the audience knows that you lost what you were saying. To develop this skill, you need experience, but you can also have somebody listen to you while you practice for a speech. You can listen to a recording of yourself as well, but you're never going to realize how much you may do this if you listen to yourself while you're practicing. You need to listen after the fact, or you need somebody else to listen. Because remember, when you're saying like or you're not focusing on those words. You're thinking about what your next thought is. That's why you were saying those words to begin with. So the only way you're going to recognize that you're saying them too often is if you listen to yourself after the fact. The next skill that you're going to need is tone. This is more obvious, but at the same time can be a little confusing. You need to avoid sounding frantic, panicked, or bored. And for the simple reason that you're going to send the wrong message. People are going to think you're scared. People are going to think you're frightened. So you need to try and avoid that as much as possible. You also may, in some situations, want to sound passionate, friendly, inspiring, trying to reach and connect with somebody. It's not for every situation because a scientist doesn't need to do these things. But if the subject of the speech is personal, or if it connects with people, or if it's something that requires empathy, you should try and have your voice be less of a robot and more of a human person to connect with the audience. The next skill that we're going to need is talking speed. And most people think of this one as being pretty easy, and it usually is. But when it goes wrong really badly, and people don't notice when they're speaking too fast or too slow. And so there's two options. If you speak too fast, nobody's going to understand you, and you're also going to trip over your words because you're not going to be able to say them cleanly. You're going to stutter, you're going to mispronounce things. If you speak too slowly, people will still not understand you, but people are also going to stop listening to you because they're going to get bored. I'll give you an example. If I start talking like this for the rest of the presentation, most people are going to stop caring about what I'm saying. If I spoke at that speed for the rest of this presentation, it would take longer and it would also be a lot less interesting. So you need to keep the speed of your voice fast enough that you're clear and fast enough that people can understand what you're saying, but you need to not talk so fast that people lose track of your ideas. The last skill is that you need to understand your audience. And this is probably the most complicated skill. You need to not be too technical or too simple. And that's because if you're too technical and the audience doesn't understand the words you're using, for instance, if you're a scientist speaking to children, the children are not going to understand most of the words that a scientist would. The children will not try to listen to the scientist if he uses too many big words. They will stop caring. In the same way, if a first grade teacher tries to speak to college students in the same way she speaks to her own students, the college students are going to get bored because the first grade teacher is not that interesting to them. She would speak slowly. She will use simple words. She will not cover ideas that they haven't heard before. You have to find a balance between how complicated you're going to be and how simple you're going to be, and it needs to be based off who's listening. Then the other huge part of this that most people forget is that you can't offend your audience. And sometimes people are doing this intentionally, or sometimes it's unavoidable for political reasons or other unavoidable issues. But if at all possible, you want to avoid offending your audience. Because if you offend somebody, they are going to stop listening to you. It is the easiest way for people to just mute you in their heads. If somebody is angry at you or disagrees with what you say, they are going to stop listening. If you have to say something that people are not going to agree with, you should try and give a logical reason and also state that you understand that not everybody will agree with you. There are situations where this isn't practical, but in general, for most situations, you are going to try to not offend people. Lastly, and as part of understanding your audience, it's beneficial if you give the audience a reason to care. You all are here, I assume, because you want to be better at public speaking or you find the subject interesting. That is your reason to care. This is a voluntary attendance. Nobody is forced to be here. Sometimes you're speaking in front of a group that may not know what you're going to speak about or may not have a choice of whether they listen. In those situations, you really should try to make something about what you're saying be important to the audience. If I went to my college and tried to tell all of my friends about polar bears for an hour, none of them will want to listen to me. If I give them a reason to listen, they still might not care about polar bears, but now they might think, oh, this is a cool trivia, or oh, this is a cool idea, or oh, this was on the Discovery Channel recently. It might not be a great reason, and it may not make them love the topic, but it's still better than them thinking, why am I talking and listening to polar bears? Sometimes this is easier than others. For instance, in our example with the noise from the neighbors and trying to create a law to prevent it. That one connects to most of the people in the town because none of them want noise at night, I would assume. Other times, like the polar bear example, it's not so easy, so you kind of have to reach for it. All right, that's the end of the skills. We're going to do a short Q&A because that was a lot of information. If you've got a question, just put an X in chat. We're going to do this for at least a couple minutes so that anybody who's on the stream can catch up. Grimson Lake. Yep, what's your question?
So the skills on properly using your tone,
Yes.
I'm just wondering, see that diverse in many cultures, so how do you cover that with a wide range of people from all around the world? Because a lot of people from a lot of places have different sets of tones of which are allowed and which are, I guess, taboo would be a good word.
Yes, I understand. So, in many parts of the world, different tones are acceptable in different situations, and different tones are used in polite speaking. You have to know your audience and your sort of culture to understand what the appropriate tone would be. I'm actually going to go back a few slides to the tone. Um, you don't want to sound offensive, you don't want to sound argumentative, and hopefully personal experience with the people that you are talking to, or at least general understanding of who you are going to be talking to, will help you with that. In some situations, you may be speaking to a group from overseas. You may be speaking to a group that you have never seen before. You may be speaking to a group that is from a far away part of your country. You should try and either research or ask other people that would know what they will be expecting and how they would expect somebody to speak to them. If a king is coming to visit and you don't know if he wants to be treated like royalty or if he is a cool guy, ask somebody who should know. There's not really a perfect answer that covers all situations, but you should try to get knowledge and try to get some sort of understanding of what would be appropriate for a tone or for a way of speaking.
Okay.
Any other questions? X is in the chat. I'm gonna mess this name up, but Sullivan. I will read his question out loud. Speaking with passion, how can you do it if you're talking about job or scientist like in Start? Okay, so what he's asking is, in a more professional setting, how can you speak with passion? It really depends on what the situation is, because sometimes you don't want to. If you're giving a business report to your boss, you don't want to speak with passion. You want to keep it professional. Sometimes, even in a business setting or in a professional setting or a scientific setting, there is passion to be had. I won't give a political example, but a lot of political topics come with passionate reasons why they should or shouldn't be in favor of something. So, passion or being very invigorated or being very energetic while giving your speech can be appropriate. And if you're doing it in a more professional setting, you need to focus on emphasis. So you're not jumping up and down, you're not acting frantic, but you are putting more strength into your words. You are emphasizing the words. You are speaking with conviction and trying to really push what you're saying towards the listener, if that makes any sense. Um, so I hope that was what you were asking, and I hope that that answers the question. So, any other questions from anybody? X is in the chat. Please don't message me directly just so that I can control the flow. All right, so we are going to move on. So we were finishing the skills, and the last skill was understanding your audience. Now we are going to move on to challenges. These are things that you're going to encounter when you're trying to prepare for public speaking or when you are doing the speech itself. These are things you're going to encounter that are struggles, that are obstacles, or that are going to make your job a little bit harder. Uh, just to list some of the ones we're going to be covering. The most obvious one is lack of confidence. A lot of people don't feel confident public speaking. It's one of the biggest things that especially young adults struggle with, and many people gain experience and confidence over time. But even some older adults may not have confidence in themselves when speaking in front of a large group. The next challenge that a lot of people can easily think of is remembering the material or remembering what you're trying to say. Because if you're focusing on speaking, you may not remember what you're trying to say. The third challenge that we're going to talk about is nervousness and fear, which is called performance anxiety when it's to do with performing in front of a group or speaking in front of a group. And a lot of people have this fear. A lot of people understand this fear. So we're going to discuss how to try and reduce it. And the last one is stage presence. And we'll get to this more when we get to that slide, but it's basically having a position and a presence on stage that gives the audience a sense of what you are there for and doesn't make the audience think less of you. So we're going to move straight through these four. To start, overcoming a lack of confidence. This is a struggle for a lot of people, and the easiest way to gain confidence is just to gain experience. That means practicing. That means having prior events where you spoke in front of a group. That means understanding your speech. Don't prepare to say ideas you don't understand. If you're a scientist, you need to understand what you're trying to say. You can't use big words if you don't understand them. If you're somebody that's going to talk to a town hall about a new law, you need to make sure you know about the new law. You can't just walk in and expect everybody to understand what you're saying if you don't understand what you're saying. Another way to overcome a lack of confidence that a lot of people don't even think about is just psyching yourself up. And I put Rocky music in as an example, which is a bit silly, but at the same time, for some people, music before their speech or stretching before their speech or just thinking positive thoughts, it can really help. And it's the same as a sports game. It's the same as a large event in your life when you need to have a good showing. Psyching yourself up is something that a lot of people don't think is going to be important, but it really is. The last one, the last way that I teach people to overcome a lack of confidence is to imagine success and not failure. A lot of people love to think about how many ways it could go wrong. A lot of people hate thinking about what if it goes perfectly. And they want it to go perfectly, but it's so much easier to think about how it can go wrong. And so you really need to try and force yourself to think about how it can go correctly, how it's going to be if you succeed. Because if you imagine that beforehand, if you focus on that beforehand, there's a much higher chance that you don't screw up in the moment. As you build confidence, as you get experience, you really start to understand that public speaking isn't something that you have to have a lot of skill to do in terms of being a genius or in terms of being awesome at public speaking. It's really something you just need to believe in yourself, and then most people are capable of publicly speaking pretty well. The next struggle that a lot of people have is remembering your material. So practicing, surprisingly, helps with a lot of these, and it does help to remember your material. If you read through what you're going to say or say it out loud in front of a mirror, it will help you. A specific thing that I find that helps me is if you focus on what comes next while you practice, it's going to help you remember what comes next when you're giving the speech. If I forget what's going to come next, it's usually because I wasn't thinking about it and I don't remember the order of things in my speech. So if you try and focus on the order while you're practicing, instead of just reading a script or instead of just memorizing the words, if you remember the order, even if you forget something, even if you have a complete mind blank, hopefully you can remember what comes next and just skip a sentence or two. As I said earlier, sometimes it helps to memorize a speech. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it's necessary, sometimes there's no alternative. Memorizing a speech is a great option if you can do it. A lot of people struggle to memorize big pieces of writing or what they're going to say, and so I don't suggest it for most people. You also need to be careful because if you memorize your speech and you forget something, some people struggle to recover. If you practice enough, you probably are not going to have that problem, and so memorization is an option. And if you are good at it and can memorize your speech successfully, it's a great way to remember your material. Lastly, just like last time, some of these are repeats, and that's for good reason. You need to imagine success and not failure. People will forget what they're trying to say if they're focused on how things can go wrong. So many people will get caught up in their own thoughts that they will actually forget what they're trying to say. So if you are focusing on how this is going to work, how it's going to be successful, how you are going to do great, you are less likely to fill up your mind with distractions. Now, performance anxiety. This is fear, this is sweat, this is shakiness. This goes hand in hand with confidence, but it's also less controllable. Some people will have a fear of speaking in front of groups. That fear may never go away entirely. It will be reduced with practice. It will be reduced with experience. But some people are going to struggle to speak in front of a group. This isn't rare. Uh, this link will be in the slideshow, which will be posted when we post the recording of this. A Gallup poll shows public speaking as the second most common fear in Americans. The first most common is snakes, which personally I don't understand, but I have heard many people say that they hate snakes. So public speaking is a common fear. A lot of people don't want to get in front of a group and speak. But things you can do to reduce it are practice, as I said, and also to physically relax yourself, whether it's stretching. A lot of athletes like to stretch before any sort of stressful activity, not sports, but other stressful activities, because stretching is something that they do that relaxes their muscles. It's therapeutic for them because it's a repetition act that they've done many times. Some people just like to sort of sit and meditate for a minute or two before they go out. It sounds silly, but it really does help a lot. Lastly, and this is something a lot of people do wrong, you don't want to try and forget about your audience. You don't want to pretend they're not there. You want to think about who's sitting in front of you, especially in the days before your speech. Because if you imagine that it's an empty auditorium in your head when you're practicing, and then you walk on stage and you try and give a speech to 1,000 people, you are going to be scared because you weren't thinking that there would be 1,000 people. You weren't preparing yourself. If you think in your head beforehand, there's going to be a group. I have to keep eye contact. I have to keep looking at them. I have to be on stage in front of people. It's going to intimidate you. But at the same time, when you walk on stage, it's not a surprise. It's not a shock. You were ready for it, even if it's scary, even if it's giving you anxiety. Some people, and everybody will know this example, some people imagine that everybody's wearing their underwear or everybody has a funny hat on. These are fine tools if they work for you, and I encourage everybody to try and have different ways of thinking about the audience so that everybody's less intimidated by them. Personally, I don't find that the underwear or the funny hats work for me, but I like to think of the audience as friends. If I feel like they're friends with me, even if I don't know them, I think of them not as being critical of me and as critiquing what I'm doing, but I think of them as somebody who's listening to me just because they want to. And so that's a skill that I find that helps. The last struggle that a lot of people have is to create a proper stage presence. And stage presence is something a lot of people don't think about. Stage presence is how you carry yourself on stage. It's your posture. It's your way of standing. Some people, if they get in front of a group, will slouch. Some people will very quickly pace. Some people will lean back and forth from foot to foot in an agitated manner, like they're worried, which is natural because you can have performance anxiety, especially if you have not had a lot of experience speaking in front of a group. But to the best of your abilities, you really want to try and limit this because the audience will notice these nervous actions and they will listen to you a little bit less because they're focused on the nervous actions. They also will take you a little less seriously. So if you can reduce these, the walking back and forth in a frantic manner, the slouching, leaning to one side a lot, if you can reduce these behaviors, people will believe that you're confident and people will believe that you know what you're saying and that what you're saying is important. The last thing that goes with stage presence is eye contact, and a lot of people think of this but don't do it. You don't have to look at anybody in particular. You just need to look towards the people. If all you do is look at your notes, or look at the wall, or look at the ceiling, it is going to look awkward. If you scan your eyes through the audience, even if you don't make eye contact with any person in particular, even if you just look at everybody's forehead, every person in the audience is going to feel a little more connected to you because they feel like you're communicating with them in particular. It's a human reaction. We communicate with our body, and eye contact is something that all of us, in our own minds, attribute to communication. When you make eye contact with somebody or look close to somebody's eyes, they will see it as eye contact and they will listen to you with more attention and with more interest. Having good stage presence is critical, but it's also harder to develop without experience. You can practice in front of a mirror and it will get easier for you to not slouch and not pace and not be nervous and move so much on stage. But at the same time, it's never going to be a perfect substitute. Practice will never be a perfect substitute for experience when we're talking about creating stage presence. I also want to stress that different situations are different for what stage presence you should be trying to create. Most people, I would assume, have seen TED Talks. TED Talks are lectures on interesting subjects of pretty much any kind. People in TED Talks usually walk slowly, not frantically, but slowly back and forth while they're giving their speech. This is fine. They're not behind a podium usually, so they're on an open stage and they can do that, and it looks comfortable. If you have an open stage, you can do the same, just like comedians do when they're giving public speech, which is just what comedians do. It's just a different form with a different goal. If you're behind a podium, though, you want to stay behind the podium. If you're in a chair for some sort of meeting, you want to stay in the chair. You don't want to do something that looks unnatural. So you really need to understand what the situation is to know what stage presence you're trying to create. All right, we're just going to review what we've talked about today. The most important part of public speaking, especially during the preparation steps, is to know your purpose. You need to know what you're trying to accomplish with your speech, even if it's just passing your class. If you have to give a speech for a college class and you just want to pass the class, that can be your goal, but you need to know what it is. You then need to prepare and practice, because if you don't prepare and you don't practice, things are going to go wrong. People are not good. People across the board are not good at walking into a room and giving a speech that they haven't prepared for. It's very rare to find somebody that can do that. And then lastly, everybody needs to try and avoid common mistakes, like we went over. You want to avoid having a bad stage presence. You want to avoid slouching and pace moving back and forth. You want to avoid, as I mentioned in the first section, you want to avoid infuriating your audience. You don't want to offend them. You don't want to make them angry at you. You also want to avoid being too complicated for your audience. You want to use words and phrases that they understand. Once you've done these three things, you're pretty much set up so that you can give a successful speech in front of a group. Nothing will prepare you entirely, and there is still some skill involved in being able to speak in front of a group. But if you understand these concepts and you practice, you probably are going to do a fine job, and over time, you're going to get a lot better at it. So, I just want to go through and say thank you. Well, somebody else made this slide. Thank you to all of the EDU crew who helped me make this slideshow and write this material, because it is not a one-man effort. I also want to give a shout out to TAW Streaming Operations, which is TSO up here in operations, because they helped me set up the stream. SOCOPS helps give out social media posts and whatnot for you guys, so that hopefully many of you saw the announcements. There's a lot of work that goes into these universities, and it's important to understand that it's a endeavor and that we really do appreciate it. And there's my dancing pickle. This presentation will be posted. TAW as a whole has Twitter, Facebook. If you want to get announcements about universities, about other events that are happening, you should subscribe to those or follow those, whatever the word would be. Also, EDU has a feedback form for our universities and other projects that we do. Carl has linked it in the chat, and if you would be willing, we would greatly appreciate it if you would fill that out because it helps us make our presentations and other projects better for the community in the future. So I want to say thank you all again for being here. I'm going to open this up for another Q&A session, and I will do this for as long as anybody has questions. And if you need to go, you are free to go. But if you would like to stay and listen to all of these questions and answers, we can get into some pretty complicated stuff, or we can give you some pretty simple explanations. So if you have a question, put an X in chat, and we'll start calling people out. Oh, yes. Also, Blue Bear, the EDU SO now, has recently been promoted, so kick her when you see her. Verindi Puppet, what's your question? Is that the question in chat?
Yes, that's the question.
So there is a tab for this. You are getting an award, which is a tab. It's different than a badge. I don't know the difference on a technical level, but you will find it on your taw.net profile page. Any other questions? Oh yes, 5 minutes until the test, everybody. You have to get an A. No, I'm kidding. Seriously, anybody for questions? I know I'm boring, but come on.
Muzzle.
Well, I really thought I thought there was actually a test. Like I was looking at the
No.
TAW University stuff.
Ah, you were seeing the TAW online classes.
Oh, what's the difference between this and that?
So the TAW online classes, sorry for everybody else who may already know this, but I'm sure some of you would like the information. The TAW online classes are training class about positions for the most part. So staff officer, field specialist, training specialist. They teach you how to do jobs. They teach you how to do positions. There's also a security awareness class, which teaches you how to be safer online. And there's an information specialist class, which teaches you about TAW policy and TAW history. Those classes give you tabs and badges, and some units require them before you become an officer.
Can anybody sign up for those?
Yes, if you go to the TAW webpage, click on the university button at the top. One of the pages under the university header is called TAW Online Education Center, and there's a link in there to a website called Open Learning, which is what hosts our online classes. This program, TAW University, is a series of classes that are lecture style, like we just did, and it is for bigger topics that are not fit for an online class, and usually they are helpful for real life as well as TAW. Connor Frosty, you have a question.
I don't unfortunately have a question, but as nobody's saying anything, I thought it'd be worth note. You know, we are all appreciative of your guys' work in EDU and putting this on for us. Obviously, I hope people can appreciate that this sort of stuff in the professional industry costs thousands to get sort of guest speakers in to talk about this stuff. And I really like the way that the presentation was all put together. So thank you very much, good sir.
Well, I do appreciate that, and it's a high praise coming from you. Hafnium G. Yes, sir. Or ma'am.
Yeah, if I need to help friends with get better at public speaking, how can I help them with it?
Well, there's a couple different ways. If they don't know the things we went over today, if they haven't had a class in school on it, if they don't have experience, you may want to just explain some of the concepts we went over today. Don't be super complicated, but just a simple explanation will go a long way to making them a better speaker. And then the other thing you can do, and I swear this is the most helpful, ask them to give you the speech or the lecture or whatever they're going to be doing as practice. Have them practice with you as the audience. They will be more comfortable because you're their friend than they will when they actually give their speech, but the practice will make it less foreign. It will make it feel more comfortable so that when they do give the real speech, they will feel like they've done this before. They will feel like this is familiar.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Verandy Puppet.
Do we need to download a PDF and send it to Chain of Command for this thing?
Yeah, when you finish a class, you'll get a certificate, and that just lets
For
you chain a
this?
command. Not this. This is a university
Oh,
class. It's okay.
okay. So I'm getting them confused.
Yep,
Okay, thank
that's
you.
the online classes. Yep. All right, Night Saber. Hi.
Hey, sir. Hey, how's it going? Thank you very much for the class. It actually was really insightful. It helped me do public speaking for my job, as well as obviously as an officer with TAW. We have mandatory, so it kind of helps out on both ends. So I appreciate all the hard work you guys put into this and giving it. It was just one of those things where also, as a refresher, I took speech and debate for 4 years in college. So it's kind of a good refresher after a long time.
Yep, absolutely. Um,
Thank you, sir.
hang on. Bearded FPV.
Yes, sir. On my tab, I took the TAW EDU classes a couple months back when I was in Paladins, and I forwarded the stuff to them, and they just kind of like bunched it all EDU online classes 6.
Yes.
But everybody else's page that I look at, it gives out classes. It actually names out the classes that they have actually taken, not just bunched them all up into 6. I
So
was wondering, how do I get that fixed?
I don't think it needs to be fixed because I think what you're seeing is older programs. The class
Sir?
names that you're seeing on other people's pages are probably from years ago when we used to do those classes in person. We changed the tab that you get awarded. If you click on the part that says online classes with the number, on the sidebar, it will hopefully list, if there's an image, click on the image, but then it will list the comments from your officers, and hopefully the officers listed what classes each tab was for. If they haven't done that, make sure that you have those certificates, or you can re-download them again, send them to your officers, because the officers can change the comments, and they can list in each tab which class you finished.
Okay, I see that now. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so if I can,
Yeah, go ahead, Night Saber.
I just submitted 6 tabs for a gentleman, and of course the tab sheet will say, for the TAW online academy class, you have six classes taking. If you click on the image, it lists out each one individually. When they get submitted through TFO, the division, the SUL or the division commander, division officer, once they get submitted and approved, it'll list out each class, and then your officers above you have a chance to actually leave a comment for you.
Yep.
But
And
yeah, I came from
hopefully,
the old school where it was both in person as well as just now taking the class online.
yep. All right, Hafnium.
Yeah. When I do a presentation, I usually begin to shake and stutter and stuff. How can I be better at yeah
Yeah,
not shaking?
physical anxiety, like stuttering or quivering hands, is harder to control. And what I can tell you is that there's a few different things that can help, but there's no perfect answer. Experience will help over time. If you speak in front of a group and struggle and do it again, you will struggle a little less. But that's not a good solution for the short term. Things that can help with physical anxiety in the immediate future, if you have something going on or you need to give a speech, stretching helps a lot of people. It doesn't help me. Imagining success helps a lot of people, helps me some. Trying to do something else with your hands can be helpful. You don't want it to be obvious, but some people carry a pen with them onto stage and they will fiddle with the pen. Don't make it a click pen that'll make noise, but you can just carry like a solid pen, like just a solid ballpoint pen without any moving parts, and you can just roll it between your fingers a little bit, and that may help. For some people, it doesn't. As for the stuttering, I would probably recommend just practicing your lines or practicing your speech, because the more comfortable you are with what you're saying and the more times you've said it, the less you're going to be thinking about it. Stuttering usually happens when you're thinking about your words too much. Sometimes it's involuntary and it's just physical, and for that, I would say drink something beforehand just to calm your mouth a little bit, and then think in the moment of confidence. Try and imagine yourself succeeding. Other than that, experience is really the only good solution that I have for you. Triskelion.
If you are able to actually use note cards, how much information should you use on them, and what kind of information?
All right. This is a complicated question because it really depends on the situation. The longer your speech, the more you want to write down. So for a class like I just did, this 40-minute presentation, you may want several note cards with maybe 2 or 3 bullet points per slide for something like this, if you were giving a slideshow presentation in front of a business meeting. If you have a presentation, you can use the presentation, but you also, as the notes, I mean, you can use the presentation as the notes, but you don't want to only be reading the presentation. In other situations, especially if it's a shorter presentation, if it's a 5-minute speech or a 10-minute speech, you probably just want to put some of the big ideas. 3 or 4 bullet points on one note card covering the big ideas. And that's so that if you forget something, you can just move to the next bullet point, because it's better than stalling and not knowing what to say next. I do know that some people write a lot on note cards and then remember where they put it on the note card so that they can reference most of their speech, but I find that it's too distracting and that too many people wind up reading off of the note card. So I hope that answered most of your question. Lord Knives. Knives?
Yeah. I actually almost forgot what I was going to say. I just wanted to like contribute and just kind of give a different perspective, because a lot of people can think that, you know, if I do it this way or if I do it that way, then I just won't have any fear of speaking, and that's not the perspective you should have. The perspective is whenever you have resources like this to make your speech better, take it, make it better, and then you have to do it repeatedly and consistently until you notice yourself that you have just lost the fear of speaking. And it doesn't come just with speaking, it comes with riding a bike, it comes with learning how to play a new game, it comes with anything, interviews, whatever. In the beginning, you're going to suck at it. You can just admit that to yourself. There's nothing that's going to be a quick fix. Just appreciate the fact that it takes time and just be patient with yourself. And you'll find that eventually you will no longer fear it.
Yep. And in case anybody didn't see it, Corpse made a great point in the chat, which is that if you forget something and skip over something in your speech, oftentimes your audience isn't going to notice because they don't know what you are supposed to say. Sometimes, if you forget something and you skip over it and it's very important or it's the focus of what you were trying to say, it may be obvious or it may be noticeable. But usually, if you skip a sentence, if you skip a few lines on a page or something like that, the audience probably won't notice. And more importantly, if you flow into your next idea, the audience won't focus on it, even if they do notice. Even if they think you might have forgotten something, even if they think you might have skipped something, they're going to be focusing on your next idea. And that's what you want to get to. All right, anything else? All right. Well, again, if anybody has questions in the following days, or if you think of something later, shoot me an email. You will see a recording of this on the TAW.net website at some point. We have to get it through streaming operations and video editing a little bit. But once it's up on YouTube, we will post a link and there will be a blog post about it probably. So keep an eye out for that. You can use it to review in the future or if you ever forget. World Class has a question?
Yeah, sorry for the interruption in the
No
middle
worries.
of that. I just thought of something important. I like going to these and stuff. They're really educational. How
Yeah.
often do you guys pull together public speaking and like these, like average in a year? I would say for example,
Do you mean
how many of
the
these do you
classes in
have?
general?
Yeah, how many of these
Ah,
classes do we have?
we try to do it monthly, and we've been pretty successful at that for about 6, 7 months now. As the holidays get here, it may or may not skip a month, but monthly is the goal. So 12 a year approximately. Keep an eye out on blog posts and keep an eye out on Steam and email announcements because you may get emails or Steam messages through the Steam group. It will be on the blog posts, and hopefully your chain of command also talks to you about it once in a while. So,
Alrighty, thank you.
yep. All right, so thank you all for attending. I appreciate your time. So I'm going to be shutting the stream off now. Actually, I didn't